First of all, let me welcome you all to summer. Today is summer solstice, June 21st. And so we're very, very excited about that. And what we wanted to do today was really talk about giving our patients knowledge, because knowledge is power. And one of the things that we have come across over the course of the last couple of years is that many people are coming in with questions about nutrition, about their diet, about what they can do to gain weight, lose weight, build muscle mass. And what I've come to understand is that a lot of people are taking bits and pieces of each of these types of diets, or I like to call them nutritional plans, and they may not necessarily be the best thing for them. So what we wanted to do tonight, the members of the Burick Center team, who I will introduce shortly, we wanted to talk about some different types of nutritional plans or diets that many people have engaged in, or you hear about on the news or through various articles. And we want to talk to you about what they mean, what they do, how they work in your body, and whether or not it's the best thing for you. There's many options for us to assist you in coming up with good nutritional plans, not only working with our nutritionists, as well as our wellness coordinator, and of course the physicians, but also looking at some of the testing now that's available to help us better understand what our metabolism is doing, what our micronutrient levels are, and really help us understand better how to improve the quality of our life. So on that, what I wanted to do is introduce the members of our panel tonight, which I am very proud and so pleased and grateful for joining us this evening. So to my left is Felicia Miller. She is the first nutritionist that we had here at the Burick Center and has been working tirelessly to kind of help build our program.
Absolutely.
To my direct left is Christy Jensick. She is our wellness coordinator, RN, that takes care of the infusion center and many of our other modalities in the back, if you will. To my right is Dr. Siciliano. He's our newest physician that has joined our practice and has a very functional and integrative approach. So very, very well versed on many of the different opportunities for testing that can help us and help the nutritionists guide their recommendations. And last but not least, our wonderful nutritionist, Jamie Ackerman. She's been with us now for about half a year and really has brought such wonderful energy and joy to our patients. Very helpful, very knowledgeable. She is always learning and continues to pursue her additional educational experiences, which she shares with us here at the Burick Center. So thank you guys all for joining us. Appreciate that. And so what I thought we could do was maybe start a little bit with some of the typical nutritional plans or diets that people come in with. So I'll, for example, have a patient who'll come and say, you know, I am desperately trying to lose weight and I'm going to do keto. And I look at them and I say, is that the right thing for you? And what do you define as keto? So what I thought we could do is start, Felicia, maybe you can start with one of the nutritional plans and then we can, or diets, and we can kind of go from there and talk a little bit about how and what these things mean and nutritionally where the deficiencies come in.
Okay. Well, one of the things I definitely want to touch on after what you were just saying, how we have all the providers and we have our wellness team, is we definitely always want to customize whatever program people want to be on or think they should be on, or the trend of the year or the month or the day, you know, customizing it to where they can be successful and what truly meets their needs. Because rarely to never is it the one diet plan or modality that fits all. So that is the first thing we offer here at the Burick Center, is that customized approach where we can sit down and really figure out through talking with people, looking at their labs, finding what they really truly need and how to get them there without huge overwhelm. And not just the, you need to be on this diet, here you go, here's your list, you know, be on your merry way. We really want to be able to sit down and educate people. As you were just saying, you know, what does keto mean to you? What does paleo mean to you? Because there's usually a pretty far stretch as to what, you know, we are as, you know, clinicians are thinking it is and what they've heard on television. And there's a lot of degrees of success and failure based on what they think they need. So to answer your question more directly, one of the things that comes up frequently right now that I think we've all noticed is inflammation. Because, we now know inflammation is the root of a lot of problems. A lot of our health concerns are related to inflammation. And having people on a diet that calms the body, calms the system, promotes healing, the gut and overall, but having that calm approach through healthy eating and diet and supplements or infusions really can improve a vast majority of issues. And the one thing we all know is an inflamed body does not lose weight. So a lot of people are like, well, I'm eating well, but I'm still not losing weight. It's like, are you eating things that are also helping nourish you and calm you? It's not always about what you can eat. It's about bringing things back in that you should be eating that are actually going to help heal you and make you feel better. And when the body is calm and healing, then the weight loss comes. So it all comes together. And sometimes it's even beyond food. Jamie and I often talk about the fact where it's also a lifestyle approach and making sure they're taking care of themselves as well, not just what they shouldn't be eating today or what they can't eat today.
Well, why don't we have Dr. Siciliano chat for a couple minutes about inflammation in the gut and what that really does with regard to our absorptive capacity and what that does in terms of our ability to process our nutrients and subsequently be able to metabolize them well so that we can be healthier.
Yeah, so going back to what Felicia said, it's really about the SAD diet, right? The standard American diet. And that's kind of rampant throughout the country. Unfortunately, people are just not eating well. And because they're eating inflammatory foods, the inflammatory foods are creating discord in their biological systems, particularly in the gut. And we know now, because there's research being done on the gut microbiome, that if you got disruption of your gut microbiome, it's going to have systemic effects in your body. So I always tell people, well, digestion really begins in the mouth. I mean, we don't chew well enough, right? I mean, how many times are we supposed to chew, which I don't, a lot of times. My mother used to yell at me, chew your food. She still does. But we should chew food about 30 times before we swallow. Why? Well, we're emulsifying the food so that when it goes down into our system, we can better absorb those micronutrients, those phytonutrients. So I used to tell patients, look, it's not always what you put into the tank, is how well you can process that food.
Right.
You can put high-grade gas into your tank, but if your carburetor is messed up, maybe it's going to get great performance. Well, you put high-grade foods into your system, but if you're not breaking it down, then that nutrition cannot be utilized by the body. So it starts with how we chew, how we process foods. We should be chewing slowly, and we don't. Many of us don't. But then when it goes down to our system, it's really about the digestive milieu. Do we have enough hydrochloric acid in our gut? Many people are what is called hypochlorhydria. So they have low hydrochloric acid. So what does this do for us or to us? Well, we can't really break down proteins in that regard. So if we can't break down the proteins and our greens to get the phytonutrients out because of low hydrochloric acid, we're not going to be absorbing that nutrition. Anybody that's been taking iron, sometimes they tell them to take a certain nutrient, and that nutrient is vitamin C. Well, why do we do that? Well, we know that if you give iron with vitamin C, which is ascorbic acid, then we get better absorption of iron. The other thing we know about if you have poor stomach acid, low stomach acid, that we can absorb calcium so that women especially can become osteoporotic with age.
Absolutely.
And if you go down further the track, then you have the pancreas and you have the gallbladder secrete bile and pancreatic enzymes. I recently had a case where a gentleman came in and he was having, to say, very greasy, smelly stools, multiple times a day. And we found out on testing, because we did a stool test, that he had basically no pancreatic elastase. So his pancreatic enzyme load was very low. What does this mean? This means he can't really break down fats and carbs. So it's showing up when he goes to the bathroom. And as soon as we put him on a product called Spectrazyme, it's called Spectrazyme Pan 9XEX. It's basically a pancreatic enzymatic formulation that remarkably, almost overnight, his stools improved and his digestion improved. And it's like a remarkable turnaround. So the other part of this too is if we don't break down foods and the foods now become an inflammatory component within our system, it can actually create inflammation within our gut, right? So we get gut permeability, increased gut permeability. So now inflammatory changes can occur within the length of our gut too. So we don't absorb nutrition. We get this increased permeability. Inflammatory changes occur, which can affect us systemically. So sometimes an inflammatory condition goes back to the way you are digesting or maldigesting. So that's where it comes down to. So we want to address inflammation by sometimes doing comprehensive stool diagnostic analysis. I basically call the stool test. We collect your stool, send it to a lab, and we check the microbiome. Do you have bad bugs in the gut? Do you got too much opportunistic bacteria? Do you got pathogenic bacteria? Do you have sometimes we find inflammatory markers like high calprotectin, or we find EPX, so we find these other markers of inflammation. And then we have to do things to help calm it down. And I basically go back and address it. It's like, well, let's get you better digesting. Let's give you digestive enzymes and change your diet, get you an anti-inflammatory diet. Let's give you something to help with gut healing, typically something with L-glutamine. L-glutamine helps to heal the gut. And then sometimes we have to give you better probiotics, re-inoculate the gut or with good probiotics, because that will make the gut happier and then you'll have better function. And as this goes on and we change your diet by working with the dietitians, then we can see that we'll have less inflammation, typically you lose weight, you'll have better energy, better sleep, and better overall functioning.
I think it's important to also talk at this point a little bit, because before we get into the exact diets, about the fact that many people develop food sensitivities.
Yes.
And these food sensitivities people aren't born with. They're acquired. And they become acquired because of the tremendous inflammation that then results in the leaky gut. And the gut is our largest organ in terms of its ability to register not only inflammation, but allergens. So it's very important that we recognize when there's been some kind of a trigger. And I know Jamie can talk a little bit more about that, because we've talked a lot about gluten issues and gluten sensitivities and how all of these things can certainly prompt significant change in people's nutritional status.
Yeah, while I've been here, I've actually had a couple of patients really do well. Two of the main things that we look at are gluten and dairy, so the casein and whey, and those tend to be the really big triggers that patients have issues with when they're acquiring these sensitivities. And most of the time when we remove them, we do see a really good result. Patients, do a lot better once those are removed. But it can also be tricky too, because our food system now has these foods hidden, these ingredients hidden. And so that's where the education comes in, just like you were talking about. It's really important to educate the patients and allow them the ability to really walk away with a wealth of knowledge, and based on the symptoms that they're having and
Well, our immune response has gotten so significant because of I think a lot of the preservatives and how our foods are processed and created. So I have a lot of patients who say to me, well, what does it mean to be whole foods? So Jamie, why don't you talk a little bit about whole foods?
I love whole foods.
The supermarket, or
I wish I had much closer. Yeah,
Okay.
I think both. No, I think, and whole foods really ties in, I think, with a majority of sort of the diets that I was talking about too, like the Mediterranean diet and some of the others that Felicia was mentioning. But when we talk about whole foods, we're talking really honestly about anything that comes from the ground, that is natural, that comes from the animal. So fruits, vegetables, the lean proteins, fish, what am I missing here? Eggs, yep, dairy. So anything really that is minimally processed, I guess, would be the big key to that. So we're really not talking about those sugary foods, the processed foods, the sugary beverages that one might have, but really focusing on fruits and vegetables and lean, healthy pieces of protein.
How about organic versus non-organic?
It's a GMO question.
Yeah.
Give us a little bit
Let's
of
get into
thoughts
that.
about that.
Well, I mean, that's a common question. So first thing when people say about organics is I always first refer back to the dirty dozen. We always have the clean 15 and the dirty dozen. So I encourage people, to look that up and, find what foods do they eat, a lot of that are on the dirty dozen list. And those foods, you want to make sure if you're eating a lot of these, produce items, there might be a good place to spend your dollar and, invest in the organic versions. For bananas that you're going to peel, I'm not so much worried about it. Is going organic going to solve all your problems? No. People start looking
It's
for
not going to necessarily help the immune response, which is what is happening in the gut with inflammation. Mhm.
Absolutely. But it's not the I'm organic, so it's cured all, because there's organic products out there that can still be fairly highly processed
Mhm.
and contain ingredients that still, are bothersome to you, depending on what is causing your inflammation or your irritation, what those core ingredients are. It's like saying, well, this is organic tobacco, so I can smoke.
That doesn't work.
I'm sure there's an angle out there and somebody's selling it, but you have to use some, sense about it. But, it's not as, it's never that black and white, but there's certainly some food products that are definitely better, organic wise and taste better.
So
It's good to
one,
mention
yeah.
too, that, we don't always have to buy organic. You can go to your local farmer and you can ask your farmer how they are
Yes.
growing their crops. And you can also get
Yes.
healthy food that's not organic, but you just have to know where it comes from. And so
Yes.
it's just about knowing your location.
Yeah, there's
Mhm.
people that can't afford
Right.
that organic certification. A lot of small local farmers, and they may say, we use minimal, pesticides or, insecticides or whatever, but they can't afford, that stamp of approval. But, if you have trust in them and, we want to support the local community and not having it trucked in from, the other side of the country, where it has to be sprayed and, treat it so it even makes the trip. It is worth looking into. So that is a thought as well.
So Jamie, why don't we start going through some of these diets, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what the nutritional deficiencies that we often see in those types of patients and how we can support them, not only with the education of what we need to incorporate or what supplements we need to give, but also, incorporating now some of what Christy provides for our patients in the IV room through not only the IV nutrients, but also ozone therapies and things like that. So why don't you start with a couple of the diets that you wanted to talk about today?
We can circle back to the keto if you'd like. I know a lot of
Yeah.
people are asking about that. And that seems to be super popular in most of the
Great.
grocery stores. Everything is sort of labeled keto. And so with the ketogenic diet, there's certain variations. It sort of has modified. It originally started in 1920, actually, just to treat epileptic patients. And they caught on that you can lose weight very easily and quickly by following that. And so the ketogenic diet is just typically a higher fat, higher protein, very low carbohydrate type of diet, if you will. And there are some benefits. Patients do lose weight, and there are some parameters that improve. So you do have some lipids that improve, their lipid markers, and as well as blood sugars also improve. And there are studies out there, some equate it to the loss of weight, which we know is obviously going to help. So I think with the ketogenic diet, the long-term studies aren't out there. I haven't read too many of them as far as what it will do. But I kind of want to circle back to what you said too, Felicia, is that it is all about where the patient is and what their lifestyle is. So it's not going to be for everyone. It's very regimented. And I think that, again, I don't ever want to say you shouldn't follow it. I think that there are benefits, but some of the things that I would be concerned about, or some of the B vitamins, definitely with following something like that. And
Fiber.
yeah, and the fiber, that's true. People really don't get much fiber when they're on that, unless you're taking a supplement. But again, speaking to a doctor or nutritionist that you would like to start that, I think is a really good move, so that they can sort of obviously monitor your labs, see how you're doing. And then if you are falling short in your B vitamins, you can obviously come in for.
And
And you have to bear the side effects
And
up
you're-
front too, right? With the ketogenic
And-
diet, there's gonna be some
we
side
switch
effects.
over.
Yeah, because anything where you're getting your fruit, a lot of people eliminate fruits and vegetables very quickly on
We
keto,
do.
which then you lose all those vitamins. But then we have Christy here.
Filling you back
up. And also heal the gut,
Well,
really.
and I think
'cause-
Christy can talk a little bit about the benefits of IV therapies,
Mhm.
especially when you're trying to follow some of these things that perhaps you may be doing either through an elimination diet or through, trying to lose weight. But Christy can talk a little bit
Healing.
about
Healing
the
the gut.
absorption of IV nutrients.
Yeah, one of the best things about IV and intramuscular is that it bypasses the gastric system. So it is considered 100% bioavailable, which means it's immediately absorbed 100%. So that's incredibly helpful, particularly in patients that have malabsorption problems, that have inflammation, whose microbiome, is off. So also with supplementation in regards to micronutrients, we have a diagnostic here that can actually check every micronutrient in the body. So we can use that diagnostic to cater to an infusion to get those deficiencies up. In regards to weight management, which definitely we work in conjunction with nutritionists as well as Dr. Burick and Dr. Siciliano, we have a lot of different micronutrients in which we can use. We were talking about protein, and one of the things that we can help with that is using amino acids, which are the building blocks to protein. So it increases and helps synthesize muscle mass. The more muscle you have, the more fat burning and calorie you can accomplish. Some of the amino acids, as Dr. Siciliano had mentioned, is glutamine. It helps with your microbiome. It increases your metabolism. Some other nutrients and micronutrients and amino acids are L-carnitine. L-carnitine specifically helps with visceral belly fat. And when you, as Dr. Siciliano had mentioned, iron, if you combine iron with B6, it actually increases the synthesis of L-carnitine. So it's really amazing what amino acids can do.
And when people talk about the amino acids, one of the other things that we are looking at is more peptide therapies that are out there.
Yeah.
So peptides have been around for a long, long time. Examples of peptides that people do know and understand well are things like insulin, collagen. These are peptides. And so when we look at how some of the peptides can be used for a variety of different things, whether it be for healing of inflammation or for weight management, it's important to understand that there are definite options. So when you look at things like Trulicity, these are all peptides. So more and more peptide therapies are coming out and about in the last several years. And I know Dr. Siciliano and Christy and I have been doing a lot of work with the peptides, having gone to some recent coursework. And you ladies are always talking about the peptides with the patients. So tell me, Mike, what your thoughts are with regard to the peptides and some of the things that you've seen that has been helpful for the patients with some of the peptide therapies that we offer here.
Yeah, we're going back to what Christy says. Putting in amino acids can be very helpful when people are cachexic, right? When they're losing muscle mass and they can't generate a response where they can actually rebuild themselves as we get older. That becomes harder for us. We don't rebuild muscle mass as much. So by giving peptide therapy, it can be IM, I believe, IV, of course, and
Subcutaneous
subcutaneous
and oral as well.
and oral.
Mhm.
So these things have a positive effect upon, because it's bypassing the system, we have a direct effect upon rebuilding the body. So in that regard, peptides are certainly very, very helpful in that recuperative phase of things when we're trying to change our bodies, maybe transitioning from bad diets to a good diet. And part of that would be receiving IV nutrition, Myers cocktails, amino acids, peptides to help with that transition. Because if you go from a poor diet to a good diet, it may be a transitional stage where you may fall behind, not feel as good, and you're making that transition.
Can be inflammatory in and of itself.
Yes.
Absolutely. And certainly if your gut is still not doing well enough to process foods, then doing IV therapy certainly could, help to bridge that transition back toward healthiness.
So one of the diets that a lot of people, or nutritional plans, a lot of people ask me about are the Mediterranean diet. So I think that's one of the ones you wanted to chat a little bit about today. So tell me about that.
I'm a fan of the Mediterranean diet. It is anti-inflammatory. First, I love the food. So
It's olive oil,
I
right?
know, right?
What's wrong about olive oil?
I know, but the foods that they incorporate in there are anti-inflammatory, and they are whole foods, like we were just talking about. And it isn't, they're more of guidelines. So it's not really a diet per se, but they really focus on the foods that are going to really provide your body with the nutrition it needs. So the fatty fishes, we're talking about the olive oil for all the good healthy fats, yogurt. We talk about yogurt all the time and the wonderful benefits that yogurt has. So they talk about all the fruits and the vegetables and the lean proteins, but they also, which I love, they talk about the process, right? And I think that's what we all sort of started with here, was we have gotten away from eating sort of as a family or as a process, right? That taking that time to chew and converse and socialize. And that's one of the things that they incorporate or really stress as part of being, a part of that Mediterranean diet. And I think that really is important, a really important piece, because
It's mindful eating.
it's mindful
Yes,
eating.
it is.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
People
really-
can associate family with it.
Yes.
Right.
Is it part of the slow food movement, they call it?
Yes.
Yeah, you're sitting, actually
Yes.
preparing, picking out what you're gonna
Yes.
eat.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because back when my grandmother and both my grandmothers were back in Brooklyn, New York, they would go out to the fruit guy, pick up some fruit. They go to the vegetable guy, pick up the veggies. They go to the fish store, go to the fish guy, hit the beef guy, whatever it was. Come back, prepare everything, and then everybody sat down and ate. And you had to be there for dinner, otherwise they wouldn't be upset. Coming from an Italian family, they would be upset with you if you weren't there sitting at the table by 6 o'clock or whatever time they said. That's very important. And in certain countries, they still, they adhere to that, and it does make a big difference.
It's an experience.
It's an experience.
It's not just a meal where
Yeah.
everybody's
So I think
shoveling it in.
That's certainly something that, we need to, I think, incorporate a little bit
Yes.
more in our thought process and really make it part of our lifestyle.
Absolutely.
So Felicia, why don't
Sure.
you talk a little bit about some of the nutritional plans that people often ask you about? For one of the big things that we hear, especially from GI people who are having a lot of gastrointestinal issues, is to go on the FODMAP diet. So
Yes.
FODMAP, it's like, ooh, what is that? Tell me all about that.
Well, first of all, we were talking earlier before we started was IBS, the diagnosis of IBS, which is the umbrella statement for you have something going on in the gut.
It's always IBS.
It's always IBS. If all else fails, you have a headache or you have IBS. And it could be constipation or diarrhea. But the FODMAP diet, and it's really not new, but it's really becoming more and more popular because, again, it does help with this a lot with inflammation. But the premise of the FODMAP diet is to remove this group of sugars that are part of these fruits, vegetables, not so much protein, but fruits and vegetables and grains that ferment in the gut. And that's where a lot of these symptoms come from. Because it's hanging out in the gut and it's fermenting or percolating almost, that's where people have these problems with gas and bloating and discomfort. Other times too much, moisture, too much fluid is coming into the gut, and you have diarrhea or loose stools. Other times this fermentation will contribute to constipation. So by eliminating these groups of foods, we will see then if things come back into balance and these symptoms will resolve. Again, it does take some time of working through with people and finding out, there might be a whole group of foods we don't have to worry about because it's really not part of their diet or their symptoms don't fall in line with that particular portion of the diet. But then it's also a lot of it is reintroducing foods carefully, because once we get everything back to a state of calm and the symptoms resolve, Well, you don't just go, okay, well, good luck then, bye. We want to reintroduce things slowly to figure out what maybe this person doesn't tolerate well and maybe needs to be out of their diet longer. Or, maybe just has to be a little more careful on portions.
Does that fall in line with the elimination diet then?
Yes, it actually does. It is a form of an elimination diet. It's
Sure.
exactly what it is. And these diets are not meant to be followed black and white forever. It's really to get the body back to a nice sense of calm, back to baseline, allow that healing to happen, and then slowly reintroduce and monitor for symptoms and, take things slowly and figure out what exactly works for that individual person. And like I said, some people don't ever tolerate some things well,
Right.
and other people it's dose related.
Well, and just reading an article today that talked about how if you have gut inflammation, it can take a minimum, if you figure out what it is was the trigger, it can take a minimum of 3 months, but
Mhm.
upwards of 2 to 3 years to really revert itself.
Mhm.
So it does become a little process of elimination to figure out what it is that's really triggering a lot of this inflammation. And fortunately, having your education and your knowledge and your support, and then of course the support of the
Yes.
IV nutrition therapies is huge
Absolutely.
to be able to get people over that hump
Yes.
and over and past that next step. So what other diets did you want to talk about, Felicia?
The other one that I get very frequently is, what about intermittent fasting?
Yeah.
That's a big one, as everybody nods. And again, that's not a one size fits all diet.
Right.
I
Certainly
found,
diabetics, it's not necessarily a
Correct.
good idea.
yeah, some people, it actually is more agitating.
Yeah.
For some
more
people, it's,
inflamed.
yes,
It's
it
much more
absolutely
inflamed.
just makes a
Yeah.
mess of things for them. It's more stressful for them. Women of certain age and where they are in menopause can also find restrictive times just agitating to other symptoms. So it's definitely not one size fits all. And again, it's what's this person's lifestyle? Do they travel? Do they have a large family and they're trying to make, 6 meals a day and, they're up from dawn to dusk,
Yeah.
So it is really customizing what works for them, because there's a lot of different styles of intermittent fasting, or, every other day or certain hours. People think they're doing intermittent fasting, but they're breaking their fast, not realizing it. So they think they're doing intermittent fasting and they're not losing any weight. And then when, we actually look at what they're eating, it's like, well, technically you weren't fasting. So you weren't actually going to receive the full benefits, but you're frustrating yourself. But it's not the one size fits all. And, for some people, it can be very problematic. For some people, it's adjusting meds,
Yes.
or insulin.
Yeah, the
or-
timing of these medications.
Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely. It's not something you can go into willy-nilly.
Mhm.
And some people get very hyperglycemic, which can affect the adrenals and starts to create
Exactly.
cortisol.
And
which
that's
has
very
all kinds of
stressful.
adverse effects
Yeah.
on the body.
Yeah, so it's not
One
healthy.
of the things that I have found very interesting over the course of the last probably 2 to 3 years is the number of people who will come in with symptoms of adrenal fatigue.
Mhm.
And that is really not a true term, as we all know. There is no such thing truly as adrenal fatigue, but you can have stress-induced adrenal insufficiency. So there are situations where we need to look at how we can help people nutritionally support them that way. And I know that Dr. Siciliano and I do a lot of work with cortisol, and we test a lot of patients with salivary cortisol levels, which are far more than doing a single cortisol study, serum or blood. So maybe Dr. Siciliano, you can talk a little bit about some of the hormonal testing that we do and why we look at people's cortisols and how that may affect our recommendations for IV therapies and nutritional recommendations.
Yeah, so if we're going to talk about cortisol, where does it come from first off? Well, it comes from the adrenal glands. And the adrenal gland is kind of like 2 glands in one. It's a funky gland. It sits on top of the kidney. It's a little bit yellowish and triangular shaped. And the outside's the cortex, where you make your cortisol. And the inside's your medulla, where you basically make your norepinephrine and epinephrine, essentially your adrenaline. So adrenal adrenaline is how I remember it. But if you're secreting way too much cortisol because of stress, it can affect basically your daily rhythms. So let's talk about the normal rhythm of cortisol. Normally it should be highest in the morning, and that's what gets you up in the morning. As you sleep, in the morning, cortisol levels slowly rise. When it hits a certain level, whatever your buzz point is, that'll get you waking up and get you out of bed. And then as the day goes on, ideally cortisol will start to come down. And then we go to bed at night when our cortisol levels are pretty much should be at the lower levels. But what happens to many Americans? Well, in the morning, when we check the cortisol, which we do by salivary testing, and we check it 4 times a day. We check it in the morning, early afternoon, late afternoon, and at night. And we chart where your cortisol is going. Quite often we may see that it be very, very low in the morning. And these are people that can't get out of bed. Hey, I need 3 cups of coffee in the morning. And that's what they need to get going. And they feel better as the day goes on. And these may be people that do better at night. Well, the diurnal rhythms are basically all messed up. So what we want to do is, with those people, we may have to give them adrenal extracts, vitamin C, ashwagandha, ginseng, to help bolster their adrenal function. But the overlying thing, quite often in our society, is the stress. We are a stressed out society. Doc, I'm eating 2 meals a day and I'm gaining weight and I'm at the gym. How come I can't lose weight? Well, tell me about your lifestyle. Well, I got, 5 kids and I'm running 2 corporations and they have all these other things going on and their head's spinning around, I say like your head's spinning around like Linda Blair, spitting out, whatever. And they say, yeah, that's exactly me. I'm like, just like Linda Blair in The Exorcist. And so my head's always spinning around like crazy. We want to calm these people down. So that's what we look at. Conversely, in some people, their cortisol levels may be high all the time. So we look at their patterns and they have these high levels of cortisol. So we got to calm them down. And again, we use adrenal modulators, adaptogenic herbs. Again, ashwagandha will come into play. Rhodiola can come into play. Passion flower, eleuthero, things that calm down the body, calm down the adrenals. So by doing these adrenal testing, we can really see what's going on. And some people are very tired, then we may have to bolster adrenal function. If they're in that hyper state, then we have to bring them down a few notches. So that's what the importance of the testing is. And again, when you have adrenal dysfunction, there's a hormonal symphony in our bodies. It's not just one thing affects one thing. Problems with the adrenals will affect your thyroid. So a lot of times as cortisol levels start to rise, what is it due to thyroid function? Well, it's such a depressed thyroid function. So you get the seesaw effect. And so a lot of times, and to help your thyroid function, you may have to calm down your adrenals, bring down that cortisol. And that's where the importance of testing comes into play.
And the same thing can happen with our sex hormones. So men will come in here and say, I need T, I need my testosterone. And you go, okay, well, before we do that, let's do some evaluations here and decide, are you truly testosterone deficient, or is this a feedback mechanism? So let's talk a little bit about muscle mass and how to build that. Jamie, why don't you talk a little bit about how you recommend, especially some of our male patients who are athletes, how we can support them nutritionally and what kinds of things you suggest to help in that process?
Yeah, so one of the misnomers, I guess, is that in order to build muscle, you need to have a lot of protein. And that's a big thing. Protein is essential, but most Americans, just because of the SAD diet, we get more protein than what we need. So honestly, when I see patients who are athletes, the first thing I look at is carbohydrates, and I want to see where their carbs are. I want to see, because most of the athletes are already eating pretty healthy, right? They're choosing the fruits, the vegetables, they have the whole grains, they're doing as much as they can to be efficient and perform the best. And so I always take a look at the carbohydrates, but then I circle back to the proteins. And for most patients or most people who are athletes, they aren't vegan or vegetarian, which is helpful, though you can be an athlete and do really well. It just takes a lot more planning and a lot more forethought. Yeah, a lot more support, if you will. But so when athletes come in, I just like to see, are they consuming, so mostly anywhere between 75 grams of protein for a male who is an athlete would be pretty sufficient. And I think that the majority of them are. And so then I just look to balance. Are we getting those proteins from good healthy foods?
And not supplements.
And yeah, yeah, that's another big thing. That's a whole different discussion, right?
Yes.
Because there are a lot of people that come in, you're right, with supplements. And then we have to really take a look at those and see, are we doing more harm or are we doing more good? So that's kind of my approach. Do you have a
No, same thing.
similar?
People think
Yeah.
protein equals muscle,
They do.
which is not how it works. It's like saying
Right.
you eat fat, you get fat.
Well, isn't there was a
no.
documentary called The Game Changers that talked all about this,
Oh,
where,
gosh, yeah,
yeah,
you're
they
right.
focus on a lot of
Right.
athletes that, were adopting more of a vegan diet,
Mhm.
and their performance levels were increasing tremendously.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's even could be like nitric oxide,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
so that, you're getting, oxygenated, blood flow to the muscles for energy and endurance. But, one of our best
Mhm.
sources is beets.
Mhm.
But we break
Sure.
down a lot of muscle with the exercise and we
Absolutely.
break down a lot of that. So
And we
I
want
know
to
that
rebuild.
Christy has created an athletic support
Oh,
infusion, which has been great. And we help people that are training for, 5Ks, triathlons, mutters, whatever you want. But it's been really, I think, such a boon to a lot of the athletes in the area to be able to provide that kind of service. But
because rebuilding is key.
right.
That's the whole piece. Is,
I think
rebuilding.
timing the key, right? With all
Yes.
of that. So you can sit down and eat a huge steak dinner and think that you're going to build muscle,
Yeah.
but it is all about the timing in which
Yes.
you're fueling your
Yeah.
body. Yeah.
Well, we talked about a lot of different diets. We talked about some of the infusion opportunities. We talked about some of the testing stuff. And I think that this has just been a wonderful experience. And I thank each of our panelists
you.
and our staff. We here at the Burick Center are so proud to be able to serve you and be able to be here for you and answer and be available for any questions that you may have at any time. Again, these lovely ladies are here for consultations for nutrition. And of course, Christy, our wellness coordinator, is here to discuss at any point any additional micronutrient testing or any additional micronutrient infusion, any other infusions that we have. And of course, Dr. Siciliano is now certainly available for not only the concierge practice, but he's also doing functional medicine consultation. So happy to serve our community, happy to be here for you. And I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time out of your evening to join us. It's been a great pleasure. And I'll be happy to answer any follow-up questions via email. Thank you so much. You have a lovely evening. Thank you.